Dad, he's spent in his life, he has a lifetime experience on Sand Creek, and nobody else that's written about Sand Creek has this kind of experience. No one else has spent more time researching Sand Creek and searching for artifacts than him. He is truly the Sand Creek expert. So when you're reading this book about Sand Creek, no one else has spent the type of time and the research and the time looking for artifacts. You'll see a small sampling of those artifacts. Maybe you saw them on your way in, and maybe you'll see them on your way out. It is a very small sampling. His artifact collection is in the thousands. And actually, by the early 2000s, he had collected over 3,000 and stopped counting. That was nearly 20 years ago. So he's found stuff since then. It's a very large collection, and so when you see that, you'll see a little snippet of what he's found. And every single artifact was a single dig. And this book is a culmination of thousands upon thousands of hours studying the event and searching for artifacts on Sand Creek. And this book reveals what was found, where it was found, and this is very important. This book also describes and shows how that affects the traditional Sand Creek story. My mom was the researcher and Dad was the archaeologist, and they truly worked as a team. And this goes into details on what they used to get clues for where to search, how they learned what information they could trust, and what piqued their interest to get started. One of the things about this book, it includes information about Sand Creek that has never been made available to the public before. There's a lot of information in this book that no one has read about before. It's been suppressed. It's been minimized. They've truly been lied about over the years. This book is eye-opening.
The cannons, I always think the cannons at Sand Creek are really interesting. I don't know if you ever stopped to think about it, but there's a lot of different ideas on how many cannons were there, but after all of our research, I've concluded that the Colorado First had 2 and the Colorado Third had 2, so I believe there were 4 cannons out there. And these cannons were, you see these Civil War movies and stuff, and they had the great big old cannons with wheels this high and huge, and they had these solid cast iron balls. They're knocking buildings down and stuff. These weren't like that at all. They were like a miniature version. They had wheels, about 3 foot high or something, and a barrel about the length of this, maybe a little bit longer. But they were really pretty small, actually. There was one round, it was called a canister, and really it was like a great big can, maybe a coffee can, filled with 69 caliber lead balls. And it was like a gigantic shotgun shell, is really what it was. The middle one is they call them a spherical case shot. It was a round cast iron ball, and these were about 4.5 inches diameter. And there's samples of those in our artifacts. You can see what they are. And these cast iron balls they would explode after they left the cannon. They had up here they had a fuse, which was kind of an interesting deal. It's called a Borman fuse. It threaded in here, and it was made out of a soft alloy of some type. And that screw in there, it was numbered 1 to 5 on the top of it, and it was soft enough that a hole could be poked in the top of that deal, and that 1 to 5. So if they poked the hole at 1 second after that left the cannon, it would explode. 2 seconds, if it's at 2 seconds after it left the cannon, it would explode. We did a lot of work trying to narrow the search down where this Indian village might be, and this is on the book. It'll explain all that for you. But and we had it narrowed down where this could be anywhere on our ranch, which was 7 miles of Sand Creek and a mile either side of Sand Creek. So that's 14 square miles. And so here you are using something this big and trying to scan, 14 square miles with this thing right there. If you can imagine, it was just an absolute overwhelming thought of accomplishing anything like that. And you turn it on, and there's metal there. It does that, and then you dig it up and see what it is.
Our book is not only filled with eyewitness accounts that we cite very well, it's about a first-hand account of discovery. So this is the best cited book on Sand Creek you're going to find. We're interested in truth. One of the reasons why we wrote this book is we're interested in getting the truth out. So much about what's in this book has been suppressed. They've been lied about, they've been minimized, they've been promised credit for discovery. You'll have to read about who promised them credit. It's all in the book, and we do not hold back. What we want is for people to get a hold of this book and make up their own mind, and not just be told one side of the story. We want this book to get in your hands so you can read it and you can learn for yourself and see what they've discovered. And one thing about this book, it's not so much about changing history. This book is about correcting history. That's going to be a big theme as you read this book. It's the only book about Sand Creek that's based on eyewitness evidence and the location of artifacts. The location of artifacts is the most important thing. And this book is really kind of like, as you sit down and read this book, it's like sitting down and having a conversation. And that's what we want you to be able to do, is sit down and just read this book, and it's really like a conversation. This book took a lot of guts to write. It took a lot of guts to get this book out there, because the information in there, there's a lot of people that don't want this information to be known. But most importantly, what this book is about the discovery that my mom and dad made. That's the most important thing. And the one thing, too, that's so important with this book is that the artifacts, that's the concrete evidence. Without artifacts, everything else is just a theory. All you have is a theory without artifacts. This book was a lot of work, but it was work well worth it. And we really, truly cannot wait for you to get your hands on this book. I'm getting ready to read a few excerpts for you. Here's an excerpt that we're going to start with, and this has to do with a trip to Mom and Dad's house by Butch Kelly. And one thing you'll see too is I'm co-author on the book, but as you'll learn right away when you read this book is it's Dad's story, so he's first person point of view character as you read the book. So anything I read that says I is him. So you'll see that when you first start reading this book. Butch Kelly visited a month later to look at bullets and other artifacts I found. Butch is a local historian and an Indian Wars cavalry reenactor. He portrayed a soldier in Son of the Morning Star, a TV miniseries about George Custer and events prior to the Little Bighorn. He looked at a cavalry carbine swivel from a carbine belt, some spurs, a bit, and 3 or 4 things that could be identified as military, he said. "Is there anything else?" Butch said after looking at hundreds of artifacts. Wasn't this enough? What more could he want? I had some 5-gallon buckets full of things like barbed wire, thin staples, round nails, and even a hubcap from a Model T Ford. Well, there was the piece of cast iron on the dash of my pickup. It didn't seem worth mentioning. I thought about putting it in my bucket of junk, but I didn't know for sure what it was, so there it stayed, and it sometimes bounced awkwardly, hitting the windshield. I went to get it. There were some threads in it that could have had something like a pipe screwed in it. I handed it to him, thinking it was worthless. "Do you know what this is?" I had to admit that I didn't. I thought it could be a broken piece of a windmill weight. The old windmills had counterbalance weights instead of tails that are common on them today. Some of the early weights were ornamental and looked like barnyard animals like horses, pigs, or cows. Some were just simple round balls. Perhaps the threads were where it screwed into the windmill. "I'll tell you what this is." He straightened his shoulders and looked directly into my eyes. I was not prepared for what he would say next. Now you're going to have to read the book to get the rest of that. So you're going to have to read the book to get the rest of that excerpt. So we've got a few more here. Here's one, a story. This is a fun story. It's made me laugh a lot when we wrote this in the book. This is a story with experience about Dad going metal detecting with Joe Harbert. Chuck went off his way and I went off mine. Here's the part I don't want you to tell people. I was walking along with my metal detector and oh, there's a snake. This is cool. It's a bull snake. It's not going to kill me. I put my metal detector down and I got my little camera, my cell phone. I'm going to get right up on that puppy and I'm going to take a nice picture. I got very close, and its body lifted up like a freaking spitting cobra. Its mouth is open, and it lunges at me. I screamed like a little girl. I dropped my phone. I was looking for my mom. I looked around to see who's looking at me, and if any humans were laughing because I'm a little girl screaming at the snake. Then immediately I realized where I'm at. I'm in the middle of freaking nowhere. I gained my senses and started laughing. I think the snake laughed at me. He put his head down and casually slithered away. I was so embarrassed. I bet he told all of his little snake buddies, "Hey, this guy's fun." I couldn't stop laughing, but we finally gathered our wits and got back to detecting.